Hello, everyone. Welcome back to OTD Military History. Today, we're doing an AMA. So, a little housekeeping very quickly. So, the first half or so of the show will be questions that were submitted ahead of time. I put out a call across social media here on YouTube as well for questions that people want to get my opinion on or need some help with in terms of research or just general historical questions. And I've got quite a variety of different ones. So I'm going to start off with ones from supporters, whether through Patreon or YouTube channel memberships, and kind of just work my way through. So that being said, just before we do jump into it, if you aren't a supporter of the channel and you like the work I'm doing and want to see it keep going and want to support the big project in Canada Normandy project I have on the go, please consider becoming a patron or a YouTube channel member. A few dollars a month is a big deal and helps quite a bit. So it's a big deal to me to get that support to help the project, as it's all financed through money I've made myself on other jobs or through support like Patreon and YouTube memberships or super chats, things of that nature. So those are very helpful. So please consider that, and also helps me keep doing these kinds of things. So just give me 1 second here. I'm going to just jump right into it with the first question. So this is an interesting one I had to kind of think about because I haven't been doing as much in the archive research as I've done in the past. In the last, I don't know, 6 months or so, haven't been doing as much. But there's some things interesting things I've seen. They're technically declassified, probably when they shouldn't have been. Nothing like state secrets or anything like that. It's just things of like personal information that got out and released from an institution that it shouldn't have, from the Second World War. I may have told the story before, but going through, I can't remember if it was a unit file or something. Second World War, especially. I know it was Second World War, and a report from this unit about the spread of venereal disease was in there, and it had all kinds of personal information about these individuals, like name, rank, serial number, service number in the Commonwealth, things like that, with their information. So it's quite wild to see that when these people are possibly still alive. It had everything there. You could easily have found these people if you wanted to. It was crazy to see that. So I don't deal with like Cold War stuff. So there's nothing like, and Cold War channels watching, welcome. Things like that, things we don't really know too much about, right? There is lots to discover, lots of stories to be told about the World Wars, especially Canada. Don't deny that, but like big revelations, I haven't really come across much. Not saying that there isn't stuff out there, but I just haven't seen anything like that's like shocking. It's just little things like that, like personal information. And the shocking thing to me most of the time, it's rather mundane, is things that were classified and I don't know why. Like I've seen that here in Canada, also in Britain, where I did quite a bit of research a couple of years back. Just things that were classified for a very long time, and I don't know why. Speculation from other historians of why they're declassified or why they were classified for so long. And then I get the file and I open it up, and there's nothing of real interest in there, or anything new or anything like that. So that's probably a surprise in itself. I know it's not probably what you're looking for, the answer there, Pat, but it's something I've noticed. It's rather not exciting, but it happens, and you find things like that, but nothing like out of the ordinary. You find like descriptions of things that are just, things of combat and people's deaths that maybe people don't know about, but nothing major about coming out about things we didn't already know. I mean, we've done a huge, particularly both World Wars, I'd say, in the Commonwealth countries anyway. Things like that. Oral history is, has done a good job. So like a lot of these things aren't surprises. It just helps kind of confirm or, string together a narrative or prove a theory as being talked about here. But yeah, nothing like Rob's saying here, like Um, Nothing like that. I don't jump to those conclusions, obviously, because that's not how history works. But it's just things like that. It's you just find things that are kind of like personal stuff, things of small nature about like people who are fighting over things like that. Nothing crazy. So unfortunately, I wish I had a better answer for you. It's just this has been going on for decades, right? Things like Ultra were released in the 70s and all of that. I'm coming at this in the second decade of the 21st century. So it's decades and decades of the conflict. So nothing, and even more for the First World War, like 100 years later, right? So nothing crazy, but there is still stuff classified. There's some stuff, and we'll get to it in a minute. I'm not sure how I order my slides, but we can harken back if we need to about accessing stuff. And a point I want to make, it's connected to this, but it's something we'll get to. But I wish I had better stories. Nothing that's new or like that. Lots of files I know. Things of nature, like things like files that haven't been looked at in a long time because I know they smell like dust and cigarettes. I know they haven't been touched in decades. That's the biggest thing I can say about that, unfortunately. So this is a really good question from Sheila Hall, and stuff I've kind of talked about time and time again, about who I respect. I think a lot of you already know. Couple that I already respect. Tim Cook is obviously one. Use his work for Canada in the World Wars all the time. He does a great job. So many books that are all excellent. So that's definitely one I respect. I've worked for him multiple times. He's a great boss, great historian, great person. Always kind of takes my questions. Always wanted to meet with me and talk about whatever. So he's a great guy and a great writer, which is something I hugely respect from him. The able to take things like unit diaries and things like that and create the narratives that he does. And for those, if someone's watching who doesn't know who he is, he did his PhD on basically the historiography of Canada's world wars, turned it into a book called Silo's Warriors. His specialty is the First World War, but he's done a ton on the Second. And his book on Canada and the legacy of the Second World War, I think, is groundbreaking and was badly needed. I keep talking about on social media on Amazon Canada anyway, .ca, how cheap it is. You should get it. I can link it later. It's such a good book, and it explains so much about how the Second World War is remembered, what impacts that had on Canada, moving through the second half of the 20th century and into the 21st, I would argue. The impacts are massive in ways that we don't expect, and Tim lays that out for us. So he's one I really respect. Another one from across the pond, I was thinking about this morning, is Gary Sheffield, who has been on the channel, which I was so appreciative of him doing. And when he's done his current project, book project, hopefully we can get him back on to kind of wrap that up, because he was still in the beginning stages when we last had him on of that project. So hopefully we can talk about that. I'm looking forward to that. Another great guy, met him a couple of times, once, talk to him obviously on Zoom, that kind of thing, online. So yeah, he's a really fantastic historian as well. He does excellent research, First World War, looking at the stuff. His books have been kind of groundbreaking for me, and looking at the First World War, like Forgotten Victory, about the First World War and the British Commonwealth, and his book on leadership in the trenches is fantastic. He's one I really admire. A few others that are probably not as well known that I admire because I just know them or met them personally is Roger Sardi. Many of you might not know who he is. He was at Laurier for many number of years. Great guy. Worked at the War Museum, worked with Tim, worked at Laurier for a very long time. He's just always great to talk to and knows a ton of stuff. And he worked for C.P. Stacey, or was a grad student. I can't remember. He knew C.P. Stacey. So for those of you in the know about Canadian military history, Stacey's kind of like this almost godlike figure in this area. He knew him, and he's writing on him, and has written on him a ton. So he's great to talk to about Stacey and how the foundations of Canadian military history were set up by him and all that. And he does great naval stuff, just like Mark Milner, who's another historian I obviously respect. Admire him a lot, met him multiple times, know him well. Did a battlefield tour with him, which was a fantastic experience, particularly in Normandy, where his father fought, and getting to hear those stories. And this was after he had released Stopping the Panzers, which is a fantastic book. And if you haven't read that, or you should get it in any way, shape, or form you can, and read it, because it really puts Normandy in perspective. And I will definitely be leaning on Mark's work for the project, particularly for the early, coverage of the early days of the landings, and up to like the 9th, 10th kind of idea, right, when things kind of slow down and the lines kind of stabilize. Mark's book is fantastic for looking at that and how he dug into that. Huge respect. Another one is, I don't know if he's watching it or not, but is Mike Bechtold. He's done a lot for me. He's done a lot to help me. Great respect for him and the work he's done and the variety of work he's done. He's a map maker, and he's done a fantastic map for me. I haven't used on the channel, I don't think, about the Battle of Hong Kong and this one particular attack for an article I wrote for the BC Yukon Legion years ago now. Fantastic. And it's like the only map that I know that's been made of the attack. There's been a few of the area itself, but not the attack. And it was it was because of me, because I don't really know too much because of the details, but he did a fantastic job with the little information I gave him, and he did a great job with that, and really helped me visualize it better, and made it fantastic. And graphic designer and great historian, obviously, who's well published and knows his stuff. And we worked together for the Air Force, which was great. So I really enjoyed that. There's so many historians. I'm just going through my head. Some in the past, who are no longer with us. Some not so much. But yeah, there's a whole bunch. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. Look at the bookshelf. There's a whole bunch of them. Mark Zilke is also great in terms of who comes on the channel when I ask him, and his ability to write, again, that narrative, which is not easy to do. People think it's easy, or some people think it's easy, of turning all of these documents like war diaries and reports, like patrol reports, which are so dry about the things that they cover, and oral history, which can be sometimes hard to parcel out because humans talk in the way humans talk, and sometimes they go off on tangents, and it's hard to mash all this together. So to do that is fantastic, and to do that engagingly is fantastic. To be able to turn that into a narrative that is that keeps people engaged. It's not easy. I mean, that's why I think a lot of military history has a bad reputation, because people think it's just dry and boring. So to turn that into a narrative is difficult. So that's definitely someone I respect in that regard. Just trying to think who else. Yeah, like those are the big ones off the top of my head, and ones I was thinking about the last couple of days. Doug Delaney is also a good one, as Norma says. He is a great writer. Looked at a couple of books of his, reviewed the Imperial Project. Imperial Project, looking at the Commonwealth and Empire armies and how they were working together. Basically, like he just literally described to me in person, it's like pieces of Lego trying to fit together to fight these wars and all of that, particularly in the Second World War. It was great to hear that from him, and he's at the Royal Military College in Kingston, which I haven't done too much with at all, actually. So I haven't really done anything with them. But so those are a few. Great to hear from your perspective on historians that you admire, or ones that you guys have done with, because I know people like Norma. Did I hit the wrong one? Yeah, here it is. And Corps Commanders as well, from Norma, saying from Doug Delaney. Like Mike, helping her with all kinds of stuff that she's working on, because she's got one or two projects on the go. I can't remember. You got stuff on the go, Norma. So like if anything like that, or a historian you like to read, like when they publish a new book, who's your like favorites, or ones you keep an eye on, or pick up that book right away. Love to hear it, because I'm always trying to learn new ones and people I've missed, or people I might need to reevaluate, and how I think about how they write history and all of that fun stuff. So hopefully that covers that one, because there's quite a few that I admire. So this one, it's long-winded. You don't really have to read about it, but there's two things I want to talk about. Two. I figured it was two for me, Norma. I thought so. This is basically about can loan officers and trying to find out stuff about them. So just give me 1 second here. So trying to shift gears a little bit. So here is something I want to point out. So generally speaking, I just want to start. So this is the start with something general here. Point I wanted to make that I was thinking about while doing this. This is the Library and Archives Canada website. So this is like I spend lots of time here, shockingly, about how to go about the files, right? So this one, I literally for this one was a question about can loan. I started very broadly and just put in can loan, and then just changed the parameters on the side to be archive only, and just left it at that. It's really simple. It's not too hard. System's a little better than it used to be. The keywords were not great. They are better now. So I was able to find lots of good stuff. However, one issue, and this is going back to the first question I had about interesting finds, right? And what kind of limits stuff we have access to is stuff like personal information is the big hitter. And what comes up constantly for me is, so I just put in can loan because the person was asking about finding out where these can loan officers were from. And that's not going to be easy to do because of it. That's personal information. Like I've seen files with wartime addresses. I mean, the phone numbers are not active anymore, but they had the phone numbers, they had their addresses, all that stuff. Seen that. So apparently that was okay. But things like this can loan list are restricted by law. Doesn't mean that they won't be unrestricted, but as you can see here, it's code 32, which means restricted by law. So that's bad. That doesn't mean I can just order it up and go look at it, a couple days later when they pull it from the building over on the other side of the river in Quebec and bring it to the reading room. I could go look at it. This I can't. So this I can request. They can do a quick search. I'm not sure how they go about doing it, and see if it's okay. Usually it's not. And then you have to do a formal ATIP request, which can take months. Sometimes some took years. It really depends. So something like this, I would assume it would not be released at all. I mean, you could try. It costs $5. They make you pay. So it's just people don't just do it nonstop, right? Because that would just gunk up the works. Nothing would ever get done. So this one, which could contain the information that was asked about in the question here about who's from where and all that kind of stuff. It might be in there, like asking about who they are and where they're from at the time of the war. Anyway, it's very unlikely to get access to that, unfortunately. So this one is the same sort of thing. So this is the list of the can loan officers at the end of the war, because it goes from January 45 to August, so end of hostilities. So again, I don't think that this one would get released. Again, it doesn't hurt to try if you want to spend the $5 and have a lot of time on your hands to wait. If you're trying to rush, don't hold your breath. So this one here is a nominal roll because this one is code 90, which means open. So when you see that code 90, that's a good thing. That means you can get it, and you can get it. However, this one is, as you can see here, is pretty much the entirety of the scheme. They call it, I don't know why they call it a scheme, but they do. It makes it sound bad. Is just the nominal roll. So it's probably just the name and the ranks. And maybe the units they went to, the British units. Maybe. Again, I don't know. I've never looked at this one. I would assume so. It's a nominal roll. Maybe it changes because this one does go from 44. So pre-Normandy to the 40s, 47. So maybe. But again, it probably wouldn't have that personal information about those people, about those Canadians who volunteered to be part of Can Loan. I doubt it. But it is code 90, so you couldn't go order it, and I could order it and have it, okayed by Monday into the system, and then probably come before the end of the next week if I were to say to do that. Depends, again, how busy they are. As far as I know, they're not too bad right now. This one's all open and good to go. So that's just a bit about that. Is code 90 is good. Other things not so good. It's really unfortunate. And again, Norma says here she had an ATIP that she's been doing since May 8th. That's actually not so bad. I've heard years especially during the pandemic, when the pandemic was at its height, people were getting like 3 years, which is unfortunate because under the Canadian law, they're supposed to not take that long, but they've just kind of let that go to the wayside and no one's doing anything about it. And they're supposed to tell you the status. Yeah. Yeah. So kind of going back to this, so those, and I had another question about this from somebody sent me an email. Someone had done some research at Urban Archives Canada for about this, and just made me think of this, is those who died, that information is available. If they died during the dates of the conflict, that is available. It's all digitized now, actually. So if you know someone or you want to research someone, a Canadian who died during the Second World War and the First, well, the First is available now. You can get it. It's digitized. You can grab it. Yeah, it's good to have that. Those have all that information. I mean, there's everything in there. Usually the service file is chock full of information, particularly for those who died and particularly for officers, right? There's, a bit in there about class and rank and all that kind of thing. There's usually more for the officers, be that as it may, or the ones who are really well known. Their files usually tend to be bigger. Generally speaking, in my experience. So that is where you can get information. That information is easier to get. But say if they died in like 46, too bad. You're not going to get anything. Or you'll get the pared down version that a lot of people get and get confused because they're like, oh, I heard this person was researching, a great uncle who was killed at, Dieppe, blah, blah, blah. And they get the full shebang, and then they go do it for, Uncle Joe who fought, the North Shores and came home and had a life, and you're not going to get it. Even though Uncle Joe could have been dead for decades, you're not going to get it. You can try. Sometimes it's okay, especially with the whole next of kin thing. I'm not really sure how that's working at the moment because they keep changing the rules. But they're so backed up that stuff takes forever. Like I have a ATIP request in for something really basic, and I haven't heard anything yet. It's like super basic. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I mean, haven't done it with the US. I can only imagine the Freedom of Information Act. I can imagine takes quite a long time, and then it just rejects outright, and that's it. Yeah, it's bonkers how long this stuff takes, especially stuff that's been decades, like the Canlon list. Why is that restricted? I couldn't tell you. Yeah, it's absolutely wild. All right, let's keep on keeping on. Okay, so another question from another supporter from Jim is, I should know this, but I don't. When Canada declared war in support of the UK, did the decision enjoy broad support at home in Canada? The basic answer is yes. Pretty much countrywide support from coast to coast, so to speak, not including Newfoundland. But yeah, pretty much widespread support in what is always termed English Canada, which at the time is a little less complicated than it is today. Yeah, lots of people were expecting it. I've seen people make strange comments about how Canada's technical declaration of war against Germany is on the 10th of September, right? Literally a full, calendar week after Britain and France, and saying that that's a show of lack of support, which is not the reason why it was done. It was a Mackenzie King political move, as he does and as he did with everything. I mean, he's a political maneuvering mastermind, and that's why that was done. Canada technically mobilized into a state of war on the 31st, roughly, even before the invasion of Poland was announced. So, I mean, you have these things, you have these things and technicalities, and what's the reality? So yes, broad support, and yes, support in Quebec. Of course, there's always been support in Quebec for both world wars. That's outside the scope, but there's always been support in Quebec. There's always been an Anglo population since the conquest, if you want to go all the way that back to 1759 or 1760, whatever, when Britain took over what it was New France. There's always been an Anglo community that's always strongly supported Britain for, I think, obvious reasons in Quebec. So they obviously supported the declarations of both wars, particularly in the second, right, when Canada does its own declaration. But that's not to say that there's not French-Canadian support either, which, again, is broader than just the province of Quebec, right? There's French-Canadians across the country, still are. I come from Franco-Ontarian background myself, so my relatives are all from Northern Ontario, and they're not from Quebec. And none of them were born there, actually. So there's widespread French-Canadian support, and you see that with the units that actually fill up faster. I think it was in the Maisonneuve out of Montreal was first to fill up. Dave Patterson's talked about this before because he's from Montreal. So I think it was the Maisonneuve. Could be wrong. Anyway, so there was obviously support in Quebec. I had a relative who was killed at Juno Beach who enlisted all on his own. For as far as I could tell, spoke no English. And from a very small fishing community, eastern Quebec and Gaspé. So there's always been support in Quebec. Yes, there was vocal, loud support for anti-war or anti-Britain. I mean, a lot of people in French, Canadian, Canada, or Quebec wanted to just protect Canada. So that's why you have things like conscription for just home. I guess I could work my way into Rob Crane's question here, technically going against the agenda. That's when that is okay, because that's domestically palatable for a large number of French Canadians, because they see as their ancestral home is actually, the St. Lawrence Valley, what was New France. So even, say support France wasn't necessarily enough, right? A lot of people felt abandoned by France, which some of them were. They were. New France kind of abandoned. Anyway, I want to get into that. But so it was like support France wasn't enough. It had to be, for home defense only. And then that maneuvers, it changes over the years. But things change in that regard for conscription and all of that. There's no major riots or deaths like you see in the First World War with the conscription crisis. You don't really see that. There's protests, of course, because there's protests in Canada through both world wars for all kinds of things, if you count strikes as well. So it's not just a language thing or a cultural thing. There's a lot of that going on. But yes, there's broad support, generally speaking, on what is, again, less problematically at the time called English Canada, and French Canada is seen to be different, but it's not so black and white, and it's not so one category versus the other. It doesn't really work like that. A lot of agricultural families are against the war, especially with conscription, and that goes across the country, and no matter what language they speak, because they need their children to work the farm, not go fight in a battlefield somewhere. So that's something else. But yes, generally speaking, when war is declared, there's support. It's not, throngs of people in the streets of, Victoria or Winnipeg or Halifax, like in the First World War, but it was one of those things of, here we go again, we got to do this. Let's do it. But yes, broadly speaking, lots of support. So question from Norma. And this is a good one, and I've been thinking about this one a lot for a long time, but especially since Norma asked it, and I can't remember what I was doing, do a lot of different research on different days. So PF is permanent force, so the regular army, broadly speaking, and the militia, right? So the non-permanent, as they call it at the time, active militia. Canadian Army has the worst way of naming itself. Yes, so they grossed about each other quite a bit during the war, particularly after. Things like memoirs, things like that. Especially as it changes, some go back to the reserve, some go to the permanent army, go to the permanent force, which becomes the Canadian Army during the war. So Norma asked this in a way, trying to make it a dichotomy, and I'm going to pull the typical historian. I say, when you say legitimate axe to grind, I think both do, but I neither do, if that makes any sense. Because you have things like officers who go to the Royal Military College of Canada in Kingston and then go join a militia unit, right? Like that was an option as their, payment of going to RMC. Like today, you go into the regular force, whatever branch that may be. But they could go and join a militia unit at the time. Like that's what Harry Kriar did. He joined a militia unit. A whole bunch of them did that. Some of them didn't go to RMC and just worked their way up through the system within the militia units. I want to say that honestly, neither of them really had an axe to grind in terms of fights, like who should be commander and all of that kind of stuff. Like that's what a lot of the fight is about, promotions and who's in command and who's favoring who for positions, like things like, again, Kriar, who I mentioned, obviously he's in the regular army after the First World War, and how he deals with some certain militia officers as they work their way up, and people like Guy Simmons and sorry, I mean, some of them not really. I mean, there's tons of work on this. I think a lot of it misses the point, because I've been reading. Oh, and this is why I was thinking about this too, because I've been reading Canadian Leadership in Normandy, right? Recently, getting ready for that one by English, and he just rails on the entire organization. So, but it talks about the different parts, right? So it's been thinking about what that means, and basically all he says is Canadian Army is terrible. The Germans did everything better, pretty much. So to him, it doesn't really matter. But he goes on and on about this stuff, right? Intellectuals, and like that's Doug Delaney's work looks at this as well. I think in a better way, in a less judgmental way, in that sense, to help you understand it. So yeah, there's a lot of issues around intellectual study in the interwar Canadian Army, which causes kind of friction, I think, as well, because certain people are doing certain things and others are learning on the job as the war starts. So to say if there's one has a legitimate axe to grind, I don't think so, and why I say that is how things have gone after the First World War, and the contraction of the Canadian Army, right? They really reduced the numbers. And because I've seen the files, did digging on this, of people who wanted to stay on and they said no. And people like Curry saying this is a bad idea. We need this. We need these lessons that we learned, in the 100 days especially. We need to keep this. We need to keep these people in, keep their knowledge, the organizational knowledge, as it's called, and move that forward. And that didn't happen because there was a economic downturn after the war. Cost, first thing that goes is usually the military, particularly after a world war. So they lost a lot of that. And then things like the Depression, which causes more cutbacks, no funding, none of that stuff. I mean, you have some Canadians going to things like Camberley and Quetta and what in British India, now Pakistan, and staff colleges and things like that. And then they set one up in Canada, of course, to prepare for staff college. And then there's a whole bunch of layers there. So I don't really think, and then of course the militia is even more hit because they cut back on all kinds of stuff. They have next to nothing. In the interwar years, they can barely do nothing. So I tend to think more in terms of that instead of the personal conflicts, because there's a ton of personal conflict. A ton, and it causes more problems, but this is just how militaries work. Yes, they're trying to work towards a goal, but I think a lot of the time, a lot of them let personality get in the way. Some of them didn't. So there's part of that as well. So yeah, and again, going a little off track here, but Chris's question, I don't know if I can come back to this one. So are there cases where we can point to where permanent Army officers in World War II were thinking a bit too much of their post-war career as opposed to ending the war? Simmons, kind of. I would say Simmons a little bit. I mean, I think this is probably the nicest thing I've ever said about him. A lot of the cases, he was trying his best. Has his good moments, right? Like things like Sicily, I think he handles it the best he can, given what he has, which is a lack of experience and the issue with the vehicles that we know about and transport and the difficult conditions and who they're fighting. I think he does the best of what he has. He does well on the Shelled, which still surprises me in a lot of ways because Harry Kriar is technically sick. No, he's technically not commander because he got sick. So they promoted Simmons on a temporary basis to lead 1st Canadian Army through the Shelled. He does well there at that level. Honestly, it surprises me based on how people have presented Simmons, but also what I've looked at in terms of how Simmons thought and worked and all of that stuff. Things like that. I mean, Kriar a little bit, but not him. And Norma just points this up, brings this up for me here. Norma's on fire today. Is not for Kriar's career, because he retires basically at the end of the war in a de facto sense. So he's trying to set up, I would say he's trying to do what he thinks is best. He, I think, is a very misunderstood leader. A lot to do with Monty. And this is going to be a bit of a rant, but the cult around Monty now in the historiography, because it definitely exists. I mean, there's the anti-Monty cult as well, right? That sometimes I'm not mistakenly, but I tend to go that way sometimes too much. So trying to be a more balanced look. So Kriar is one of those people that gets caught up in the pro-Monty people come after Kriar as a bad leader. He doesn't know what he's doing because Monty said so. I mean, I know a lot of people say this, and I think it's not genuine. I think Kriar is misunderstood because of things like Hong Kong and Dieppe, all of that, and he made some mistakes. But who at that level, when you're in the chief general staff of the Canadian Army and military, who isn't going to make mistakes in a world war that's brand new? You don't know what's happening from day to day. You know what the next thing is going to be. So I think people are a bit too much against Kriar, and I think he did the best he could under some of the circumstances. So he's trying to set up the Canadian Army for the post-war world as best he can, and Folks is the guy he goes with. That partly to do with Folks being a schmoozer and a politically minded. Yes, I think Granatstein says it in the general's book, that he's the most politically minded general ever. I would say. He knew what he was doing, very well knew what he was doing. And he was not the best combat leader. No, I'm not going to say that. But maybe that's what Kriar wanted for the post-war period. Because Kriar leads 1st Canadian Army, right? Called 1st Canadian Army, making a point here. It's a multinational army, right? There are people from different nations fighting under 1st Canadian Army at the divisional level, even down to small brigade level, right? The Czechoslovakians are technically part of 1st Canadian Army as they screen off Dunkirk. So, I mean, he's dealt with many countries, many people, different backgrounds. I think he knows what's coming in the post-war world where Canada is going to have to, balance people from the United States, people from Britain, different levels. And I think he wanted a politician more than a, guns blazing frontline kind of commander. Was Folks the right decision? Simmons thought he was going to get it. He didn't get it. They went to Folks, obviously, because Simmons and Kriar, had butted heads numerous times about all kinds of things. The entire period from D-Day, pre-D-Day on, it's a big mess. So going back to the big thing at the root of this is the permanent force versus the militia. You have a lot of the guys at the top are all permanent force. They don't come up from the militia, and people like Galloway, part of the RCR, I talked about on World War II TV in terms of landing in mainland Italy. That's part of that. His one book is called The General That Never Was, because he saw that because he was a militia officer and not permanent force. He thought he should have been promoted to head the RCR in the war, which he did for a couple of weeks and then gets replaced. So that's kind of an example I think of. Like Hofmeister is one who jumps up through the ranks, which is different because he had the ability to lead from the front and lead well. And, no one really had a bad thing to say about Hofmeister. So he's the rare example here of that. So what's right or wrong, I don't know, but I think there's deeper institutional issues that are not blame, but are the fault of the government for what they let happen. I know that's kind of beating a dead horse, but it's still something that gets forgot a lot. And we're still seeing this today with the government not doing what it should be doing for the Canadian military. Anyway, so hopefully that's the answer. That's a good answer for you, Norma. But it's complicated, and a lot of people have done a lot of good work on this. Some not so much. But Doug Delaney has dug into this. And if anyone else is interested in this area, that's where I would go. So another supporter. This was an interesting one because I haven't got a chance to really look into this. I don't know if this comes back to. Oh, thanks, Chris. I don't know if this comes back to a privacy issue. That's my guess, because I dug and I couldn't find anything really. I mean, like I said, this person sent me the release on this stuff and what got released. That's what I can think of. Have a list of Royal Canadian military officers because they're working. I know in the immediate post-war period, there's a lot of cross working with each other, pollination, whatever you want to call it. There's a ton of that, particularly right after, and then as things get to heat up a little bit in certain cases, and even later on. So is that potentially the reason they just have their personal information on file and don't want to release it? Potentially. Something I was also thinking about, and this is just pure speculation. Yeah, I don't know the date of the list. I didn't get a chance to look, unfortunately. I couldn't get away from some other stuff. Just busy as always. So I couldn't get a chance, unfortunately. But hopefully the person who's watching who asked this question can answer that for us if they're okay with answering that question for us. But they don't have to. And maybe I can look after, depending on how things go. Anyway, so this might be pure speculation, but things like technology play a role in stuff getting limited. Things like nuclear power play a role in this. Because I know there was a lot of Americans working in Canada and vice versa, right, with the nuclear program, particularly with the Navy, right? Like Jimmy Carter came up to Canada, Chalk River, like that's a well-known story. He's the U.S. Navy. Scott Grimm would explain yourself. Yeah, I didn't get a chance to look. I'm kicking myself. Yeah, I figured that. You might be able to cross-reference it with some of the names, but that would be a lot of work and take some time if that's even possible. But yeah, no date on the list. That doesn't surprise me. That's the only thing I can think of. Maybe it's connected to nuclear power, which is still hush-hush, particularly up here. And I know that for something else I was doing recently for a job interview I went to. I don't know anything other than that, but I know a lot of stuff is being asked about nuclear power in Canada, particularly connected to the military. What being asked, I don't know, but I know that's being asked. So maybe it's connected to that, because that's kind of the Navy's purview in a lot of ways with the technology they're working at the time. So sorry, Scott, I wish I had a better answer for you. That's one of those things that's locked up tight, and I don't know anything about. I wish I knew more. Always more I can dig into, but sorry, I don't have a better answer for you. That's why I didn't answer your email right away, because I got it and I'm like, oh, I can dig, and then I tried and got nowhere, and then life happens. Okay, so this one is from Patreon, from a patron. Sorry, just go. Let me go back here real quick. Yeah, I think you're gonna have to, Scott, but you know how to do. Yeah, this is for you and Cold War channel to figure out. This is your guys' area, not mine. Archive and Cold War stuff. I don't know. I'm interested to know, but I don't know how much I can do to help, unfortunately. Anyway, yeah, it's fascinating stuff. So this one's from Patreon, which is great. They didn't put it for this, so maybe I'll answer it later. Anyway, sorry, I just saw a question. I'll have to come back. That's funny. But mutinies or sit-down strikes in camps in England in August 41. Was anything done really fairly harshly? So I dug into this the best I could. I dug into the official history on this, 6 years of war, because that talks about the Canadian Army in England right after the fall of France and before Italy kicks off. I couldn't find anything specifically. So I've done a lot of digging on war diaries of various units, right? Ones that go to Italy, ones that go to Northwest Europe, ones that don't go anywhere, that kind of do different things or in different roles. So I've gone through a ton of war diaries. Again, this isn't what's the word I'm looking for? Comprehensive answer. I can't answer everything. There's a lot going on here. So a lot of them, no, there's discipline handed out to the individuals. Nothing crazy harsh for anything like issues of discipline. No real group punishments that I could see. There's lots of court martials for all kinds of things, right? As armies and sitting around for years tend to have, particularly the Canadian Army. things like that. So no, I don't. Nothing too harsh that I've ever seen, particularly in August 41, because the officers are not dumb, despite what some people say. They know what's going on here. They know that they're not going to the continent anytime soon. They have to be still on their toes, even into August 41, even after the invasion of the Soviet Union. They have no idea what's going to happen, right? So group mass punishments aren't going to work for a group of usually young men. I remember being a young man of that age group and doing dumb things and, thinking we know better. And, mass punishments and harsh punishments wouldn't work because young people do dumb things, but you still need them for this, right? So nothing major. Again, a lot of things like small things like people going AWOL and stuff like that, and confined to barracks and docking of pay and fatigues and all that kind of stuff, but nothing I would call major. To me, it just seems like the same old. So I couldn't find these ones specifically because it's hard to drill down into camps because I'm not sure which camps these were because I dug and I couldn't find anything. Real broadly speaking, I mean, again, I didn't have tons of hours and hours because this one's a rabbit hole. If you want to go down this one yourself, there's a lot there. So you could do lots of digging on that, right? Because Canadian armies in England from December 39 until some of it until they head to Italy, Sicily. It's a long time. So a lot of stuff happens, but you can't go harsh. You can't go all pals of glory on them and line them up. It's not going to work. So they didn't do that. So, but again, I think it's more on the individual basis than unit punishment because that just also doesn't work, right? You can't punish whole units like that in a harsh manner. I mean, is it fair? Hard to say. It seems normal is probably a better way for me to answer it with the discipline at the time. Okay, so I see there's comments on the sidebar. I will get to those. I know some of them are connected to what we're talking about now, but I can recall if need be. So moving on. So this is now past all the supporters. So this is from James Jeffries, another great historian who's been on the channel. What are your thoughts regarding the evolving collective memory of the Second World War as it approaches the end of it being within living memory, which is incredibly sad? Is there anything to be learned from the First World War we should be mindful of for the centenary of the Second? So I do think these are connected, so I'm going to answer them together. So there's a few things to be learned. One that really speaks to me as a historian of both of these conflicts and seeing how, and this is Canadian specific because I can't really speak to Britain too much or the United States or anywhere else, Australia, New Zealand, Commonwealth, generally speaking, or the former empire. I saw how it was done in Canada. And I still argue this today, the First World War is viewed just more. The First World War just gets more attention in Canada, I would argue, than the Second in a lot of ways, right? You see a lot of things like Vimy this, right? It's not ever Ortona Road. It's always Vimy Road, right? The Canadian War Museum's on Vimy Place, not, Shell's Place. Like that memory of that war is so more ingrained in Canada than the Second, right? All the war memorials are for the First World War. Down from the National War Memorial was built for the First and only got the Second World War dates, and that's it. Added to it, in the 70s? Maybe later, 70s, 80s? Decades later, even after the end of the war. So, and you see that in small towns, right? The names of the Second World War, Korea, peacekeeping, whatever, are added later. So that is what the government goes off of when it does commemoration, right? They're the ones with the money. They're the ones who control it. And they control all the sites. I'm scared we're not going to see as much. We're not going to see as much for the Second because the First has such a strong place in Canadian culture and identity with the whole Vimy myth, which I've talked about a ton. So I think in the lesson is there's going to be less for the Second because the Canadian government for the centenary of the First World War gave out buckets and buckets of cash, which is incredibly rare for the Canadian government to do. They don't support history as well as they should, or commemoration, or whatever you want to call it. You don't see a lot. For the First World War, everybody was getting cash. They were just throwing that around like nobody's business. I don't think they're going to do that for the Second. I don't see that happening. There's a lot more at stake for the government, if this makes sense, for the second, right? The First World War was different in how Canada was run and what Canada had the ability to do, right? First World War is Canada has no choice to go, right? The choice of what to do more or less laid with Canada. But they were in a state of war as soon as Britain declared war, right? On August 4th, whatever, 1914. Doesn't matter. They're in because we didn't have control over our foreign policy at the time. Second World War, they did. That's why there's the week later and all these decisions that are made. And some of these are still hot button issues, particularly with how the Canadian government operates. And I'm not saying this on party. I could do a whole show on this about how these wars are remembered in Canada and what I think will come. So it's something I'm worried that there's going to be nothing done with, because there's a lot of hot button issues, things people use up for political points, which gets done in this country, not just only in this country, but in every kind of way. They'll fight over each other, suit color choices and how many times somebody blinked and then try to turn it into a thing. It's kind of appalling to see and really, really unfortunate. And I'm not saying one way or the other. This is all the parties. They all do stupid, dumb things and don't have a lot of the time Canada's best interest at heart when it comes to this sort of stuff. It's all about, gotcha and one-upism, which I don't like. So I'm scared that depending on, I don't matter who wins the next election, what's going to happen for coming anniversaries, particularly the centenary. Who knows who will be in power? I have no idea. Couldn't tell you. Nobody will know. I think at this point, we don't know. I think neither of them, it's usually the conservatives or the liberals are in power, right? I don't think either of them will do much for just all kinds of reasons. There's all kinds of political hot button issues, things like Japanese-Canadian internment. Canada, in reasons, gets blamed for nuking Japan. I mean, Canada is connected to the Manhattan Project. It's not like they had a decision on who dropped the bombs, but things like that, right? Jonathan Vance has talked about this. Tim Cook has talked about this. And there's another historian I greatly admire, and he taught me, is Jonathan Vance. Great historian. Sorry. Go back to another question. He's a fantastic First World War historian and historian in general. He talks about in his book on memory of the First World War, which is fantastic. The name, why is the title escaping me at the moment? That's bad. Anyway, he talks about how the memory of the First World War is different than the second, whereas the second has that good war almost myth to it, but a lot of it's true in that case, right? That's the war that had to be fought and had the moral reasons to do it, and we just don't think of it the same way. It's different. So in Canada, I don't see there's going to be much spending when there probably should be more on the second because of how it's remembered. I think it's not remembered in a good way. We tend to focus on the negatives like internment, and which we should always talk about. These things should be talked, I think, in equal measure. But people like to use them for political points. And I think, thank you for the super chat, David. Appreciate it. Super chats are extremely helpful. I think there's a lack of political will, and that goes on both sides of the aisle. It's anytime you spend money in this country, someone's always railing on about taxes and blah, 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 blah. And nothing gets done, and we all just keep going about the same old, which I think is unfortunate. But a lesson to be learned, I think, coming up for the second is it's an opportunity, and probably no one will listen to me, but I think it's an opportunity to almost reframe how we think about the Second World War, what it means for Canada, what it meant for Canada, and what that means as a changing country. And Norma brings up a good point here. So I think Norma's right in a sense, not disagreeing with you, Norma, per se, but because I think about this question a lot, is obviously Canada, that's so noble. Thank you, Norma. It's back there behind me, but that's going to drive me crazy. Anyway, so Norma makes a good point here. The Canadian society of 1945 is very different than the Canadian society of 2023 in a lot of ways. A lot of the ways it's the same, which is great, and whatever. I think it's great. It's the same and so different at the same time. Because again, I've talked about this before. I think immigration is the lifeblood of Canada. It always has been. It's obviously full of issues in terms of the Indigenous people and all of that stuff. But I think it is the lifeblood of Canada and different cultures and the mashing up and coming together. And the way that we have done it recently, I think is great, and the way it needs to go. So I've been thinking about this a lot and kind of thinking about like things like the War Museum and what that means and how to get people interested. Things like that. It's because I went to a conference there about the end of the First World War during the centenary. I think it was in 2019. It must have been because it's pre-COVID for everything. I was thinking about this. I didn't think you were judging either, Norma. It is different, and places are always going to be different decades after, or 8 decades later. Like that's just life. That's just humanity. Sorry, I just want to go back here. I'm making a bigger point here. I think our view, and I think Dave from Cold War Channel is hitting on something here, is where the memory of Canada, Second World War sits. I don't disagree with David here. I wish I did because I wish it was rooted somewhere differently. The Canadian memory of the Second World War, and I would say this has been going on forever. I don't even think it's having to do anything with necessarily Band of Brothers, Saving Private Ryan, right? You see that as a renaissance at the end of the 90s and into the 21st century. But you see that things Longest Day, all those movies that came out a long time ago. Anyway, focusing on other countries. However, I think that's something we can lean into in a different way, though. And this brings me back to kind of Norma's point, because I was thinking about this at that conference I was talking about for the First World War. We have, and because I go to the War Museum often, usually in the summer, because I'm usually working on whatever. And that's when the tour groups come, right? Like that's when the big tour groups come. And they come from other countries, right? We have a lot of Chinese tourism in Ottawa. I don't know why. Not knocking against people coming from China or whatever. It's just I don't know why Ottawa. Canada stuff, I guess, and they go to casinos. I think is a big deal. I've seen in some of these tours, or I've heard people who know people who've taken these tours. So again, that's just an assumption. However, what I was thinking about this, and we have people coming from places like India and South Asia, East Asia, the Middle East, right? These places are not untouched by the war, obviously, but we tend to take a narrow scope of how we look at the Second World War, right? It's got to, we have to only have a Canadian unit. You got to have, the big name in there. Or that's all we're going to talk about. You have Canadians all over the bloody place fighting in the Second World War. We have Canadians fighting in North Africa as part of units. Galloway was, attached to the Irish Rifles. You have RCAF units fighting in North Africa leading up to Sicily. You have Canadians in the Far East, Chinese Canadians fighting in the Far East, working with guerrillas. These things are mentioned in the War Museum, but we don't really touch into it. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to pull out these strands of connections and then connect to these different areas where a lot of new Canadians are from. That is part of the Canadian story now, right? What the Indian Army did in the war, which the Indian Army is the biggest volunteer army, I think almost ever, isn't it? It's got to be it's got to be up there because it's massive and it's all volunteer. There's got to be people who've moved here from South Asia that have relatives who fought in the Indian Army. Like that's just math. We don't talk about that in that sense, or how that can connect to Canada today. I think that's one thing we could do to get people interested in this. Is we have connections to this war in a different way that people are not willing to pay attention to for all kinds of different reasons. And because Norm was talking about political capital, and I agree with you, because they don't see that as a way of winning political points, et cetera, et cetera. So that's unfortunate, because it's all about, political points in the House of Commons, and instead of thinking what's best for the country at large. And I think if we changed how we remember this war and reframe it a little bit, we can keep that memory going of, what the North Shore did on D-Day, and, the Black Watch and the Shell, and what units did in the Netherlands, and all of that good stuff that we talk about, and, what Bomber Command did, and the RCN. If we bring in more, because again, I'm a huge history nerd like all of you, I just want more, right? So why not do more? Why not look at more? Why aren't we encouraging more? That I don't think is a bad thing, and I think that's a lesson that can be learned. First World War centenary was all Vimy this, Vimy that, Vimy, 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 Vimy. We weren't talking about, Second Ypres or Canal du Nord. It was Vimy, 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 Vimy. That's the lesson I think can be learned, is we need to focus on some different stuff, pull out some new threads, take it a different direction and but still talk about the same stuff we talk about, but really dig, really find some good stories, because I know they're out there, because I tried to do this as a postdoc somewhere at the War Museum before COVID. My plan was to work with community organizations and what they had been doing, like Black History Ontario, the Chinese Canadian, I can't remember the official name, the Chinese Canadian Military Museum that's in Vancouver. But they do lots of great work, and they're pulling stories out and amazing things and great people who are in the Canadian military, and we do nothing with it. We just, oh, it's great, post somewhere on social media for one day a year, and that's it. Where we can be pulling these threads out and doing more. That's the lesson I think I would take from the first, is we are too narrowly focused in this country, and it hurts us. We want new people, or younger people especially, and this isn't even new Canadians, this is just young people of any background I think this would apply to, want to know different things and learn about different stuff. And I think that's the way to do it. That's just my opinion. Oh, thank you for the support here. Hopefully nothing history related is what I can say. Okay, so that was a good question from James. Oops, hitting too many buttons here. Okay, here's a really specific one, and I like it. All right, here we go. So I remember you talking about how Sam Hughes, Minister of Defense in the First World War, made Valcartier even though it wasn't necessary. So the plan before Valcartier was to use Borden. I had been, sorry, I just got a little warm. Up on our third floor, it gets toasty up here. Was to use Borden. Hughes wanted, well, I argue he wanted to line the pockets of his cronies as he did for everything. So they had to build a new camp at Valcartier. He says it was better to have it there because it was closer to Montreal. Quebec City, to get everybody out to go to Europe, which is just bonkers. Was it a good move for future operations? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that you asked that kind of question, in the sense of that's not how it went after the fact, right? It was done locally, right? That's just how the first contingent, which becomes the first division, was raised and initially trained. So everybody came together at Valcartier. Sam Hughes did his wild man things of promoting and demoting at the drop of a hat on the whim of him, whenever, moving units, naming them whatever he wanted with this numbered battalion system. But after that, it wasn't done like that. It was done locally, and training was done locally, and then they would come and then move to Europe, well, to England, and then to the trenches. So it didn't really make a difference. Thanks for watching. I can't believe an hour has gone by already. It feels like it's been 5 minutes. I appreciate it. I'm sure you are busy with work and studying and all the things that you do. So I don't think it really makes a difference about Valcartier. It's still used today. So I guess it has an impact on future operations and however you want. But during the war, I don't think it makes one bit of difference, because people are coming from everywhere, right? From Vancouver Island through to Halifax. The units are being trained anywhere in between. So they all have to get to England somehow. So it's just different. But I think it was just a way for Hughes to be in control, line some pockets, and do the Sam Hughes things that he did. Okay, so these are two that were asked different places. I don't remember exactly where, but kind of along the same way. So I've already kind of talked about this. So fighting and asking about service records. So if they survived the war, you got to put in the request. You have to wait. You're at the whim of Library and Archives Canada, and it is Library and Archives Canada. It's not the Directorate of History and Heritage. They don't hold those records. They've all been transferred to Library and Archives Canada. So don't try to go down the DHH rabbit hole as I did way back when. It'll lead you nowhere for this regard. And this one is asking about the UK where he worked. I'm not sure. I think this means they're Canadian because it says in the UK where they worked. Again, it's the same issue. If they served in the Canadian forces and or military, sorry, forces is the new terms, and they survived, you're not going to get much at the beginning. There's stuff that's blacked out unless you are the next of kin, and that can be a whole other thing you got to do. Again, depending on when this person passed and all that stuff. So it's hard to argue these specifically, but generally speaking, it's usually an ATIP request, which are easy to fill out. It's just everything after that is a long wait and takes forever. But when you are making the ATIP request, and I've done this myself, is the more information you have, the better. So anything you've got, you put it in there. Even if it's kind of conjecture within the family stories, plug it in there and see if it'll help. Because sometimes it's not clear who somebody is or what they're registered on. And this is to another point, and I've made this point before, but I don't know who might be coming in and new watching but not commenting. It's, if you want to do this kind of research, and this is just a general thing, not about these two individuals and their families, because I don't know who they are and who these people are, who ask the questions are necessarily, and who their family members are who served. If you want to do this type of research, okay, so Norma says if they've been dead for 40 years or more, which is a long time, you don't have to prove you're related. And then they still do redact some stuff, usually, sometimes. Depends. Anyway, want to get it in there before I forgot about it, is know what you might be getting into here. I've heard from other people, seen it myself. People find things they're not expecting. And that can shatter a lot of people's perceptions of a relative. Sweet uncle, Grandpa Joe had a separate family in England that he abandoned. That's happened. Had a kid that they abandoned, right? I've heard about that happening, somewhat related to my own family, not directly. Someone died and they found out they related. So it's wild. Or, Uncle John was, got VD like 6 times. So just be careful. You might find out things you weren't expecting, and some people get upset about this stuff. So just keep that in mind. But hopefully that answered it. I'm always happy to help people as much as I can with this kind of thing, depending on what you're looking for and where this person served and what and all that stuff. Always happy to help. So this one's a pretty easy one to answer about DIEP. And I touched on it a little bit with Kriar earlier. So why were Canadians picked for DIEP rather than British troops? Initially, it was British troops selected for DIEP. Canada got involved because Canada had not been involved, if that makes sense. This is the first time, DIEP's the first time Canadian Army soldiers are firing shots in anger since Hong Kong. And before that, nothing. So this is something of getting the Canadians into the fight. For political reasons at home, people are extremely restless. Because it happened with Hong Kong, there's all this push to get Canadians to do something other than presumably, or open to the public anyway, of the opinion that they're just sitting on their butts in England doing nothing. So that's happens why Hong Kong happens the way it does, in my argument, which I think I outlined pretty well in my dissertation. I think DIEP's similar in a lot of ways. Kriar, again, very politically minded, knows what's going on and wants to get Canadians involved. So he asked basically to get Canadians involved, and they're under the command of the time of Montgomery while this is all being planned, and he's in command, all this stuff. So they get plugged in, and then there's the whole thing with Rudder is the original iteration of DIEP, which becomes Operation Jubilee later on. Again, I don't know if these are apocryphal. I couldn't back them up with primary docs, but something that's always stuck out to me is when Rudder is canceled and they have to get off the boats, literally some guys are said to have been crying, or they're visibly upset because they want to go fight. So Canadians want to get in the fight. So that's why they're picked. This is Canadians wanting to do it. It's the same with Normandy in a bit of a more complicated way. Mark Milner outlines this in his books and his works very well. It's very similar. Same with Hong Kong, right? It's Canadians getting themselves in there, and then things go bad, and then we go back, well, why were they there? Because we wanted to be there. They wanted to be there. So it's another thing, and this is why I have a little concern about, how the Second World War is going to be remembered, because things like DIEP get brought up. Oh, the Brits use this as cannon fodder, blah, 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 blah. Are you cannon fodder when you're the one who requested to be in the front line? No. So it's a question that gets people upset. It gets people worked up, and this is why the governments avoid it, because they have fights all the time about stupid stuff. So I think it's it's a really simple one there is Canadians want in, and they said yes. So this is a really, really interesting one that I got from here. So I didn't consult the UK official history for this one, but I've heard this before. I disagree with this completely, saying that the soft skin trucks are Canada's most important contribution to Allied victory. I can see why a British official history would say that, because it plays a massive role in places like North Africa, in getting those things out, because the Americans are making other stuff, right? Tanks are being made in US, even though Canada was making tanks before. All the Allies decided together, hey, we can just make them all in America. It's easier, it's cheaper, and it's better for all of us if we just do it that way. So there's this not mythos, it's not very strong, but it is out there that this is the Canadian contribution above all else. Like, these trucks are everywhere, all over the place. You see them in crazy places. They pop up still today, and very well made, and obviously played an important role. Is it Canada's greatest contribution to Allied victory? I wouldn't even put it in the top. I don't want to say top 10, but I wouldn't put it top 10 off the top of my head. To me, we got at the top, because I was going to make a video about this and just never got to finishing it, is, to me, for the biggest contribution, to me, it's like a 1 and a 1A kind of thing. Is the Battle of the Atlantic is massive for Canada's contribution to Allied victory in that sense, because that goes on forever. I mean, Canada has a point where actually the RCN is removed from doing escort duty for a short period, or in control of it for a short period, because of the losses are so high. It needs time to regroup and get back at it. But also one that, and other people agree with me, is the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan. That I put those as 1 and 1A. Pick whatever way you want to put them, doesn't matter to me. And why I say that's Canada's greatest contribution is because I don't know where else something like the BC ATP can be done geographically, politically. I don't see it fitting anywhere else. You can't do it in the United States because they're not at war, even though there's a connection there with the US, and things change a little bit as that program goes along. You can't do it in Australia. It's too far, way too far. It's too difficult, right? Because you have to go all the way around through the Indian Ocean, which is not secure in that sense. Things like that. Canada's big, still is big. Lots of empty spaces. Lots of empty space for these airfields. There's not, the distance still today between our major cities is mind-boggling to people from, say, Europe. There's always that joke in Canada. People want to go to Vancouver and see Niagara Falls in like the same day or a day apart or something like that. The distances are just mind-boggling. So you can stick an airfield on, Farmer John's field somewhere in the middle of Saskatchewan or rural Ontario, and it's not a problem because there's nobody there. You can still do that today in a lot of places. And also politically, though, right? Because Canada has to be involved, right? Because the Canadian populace wants to be involved. King doesn't want the losses of the trenches, right? I've talked about this many times. It's discussed in Canadian literature about the war all the time. Is he wants to keep things down, keep that limited liability going as long as possible, because he's scared of conscription, because he's scared of losing his political power base in Quebec, which he blatantly says in his diary pretty much all the time. Conscription, conscription, conscription. I called it the Damocles sword of King during the war. It's always hanging over his head, whether it is or not. He thinks it's there. So he wants to keep things low, but he wants to make a major contribution. How do you do that? You train air crews. As it turns out, the losses of Canadians in Bomber Command are astronomical and are actually massive. But they're so piecemeal, it doesn't quite come together as a Passchendaele, right? You're not losing all these guys on the Somme on 1 week. It's losses, massive losses, but they're spread out, so they don't seem as big when they are huge. The number of losses are high, particularly for those number of forces involved. It's massive. It's something that I think backfires in that regard. Politically, not really, but King wants to keep it. The Air Force is seen to be safer. It's going to be less casualties because there's less people. It's just math to him. So, and money at the time is not an issue. They'll just sling cash like anybody's business, and it was fine, and it was. So Canada pays for the BCATP because it can economically, it has the political will to do so, has the space. So I don't see how a system like that gets put anywhere else. In the way it's done, Canada has the population to support it, supply it, has the room, political will. So that's why I put that loses number 1 and 2, right? Because of the Battle of the Atlantic. Canada is obviously on the Atlantic, shorter distance a lot of the times, particularly from Newfoundland, which I know is not part of Canada at the time. De facto basically is, because the RCN is controlling it anyway. And that's one of the big reasons why Newfoundland does join Canada, is because of the war and the Canadian connection into what's going on in Newfoundland. That's a big part of it. Because people at the time said so. Anyway, so it's geography, it's things like that. And then you can get down into the nitty-gritty battles and things like that. And Norman talked about the Sheld there and the Corvettes, again, the political will to do these things and the position to do these things. And Canada with the Sheld is put on, it's called the long left flank, where the Sheld just happens to be. And that's why the 1st Canadian Army gets that difficult task. Sort of. Could have been done differently, but it wasn't. So I would say these vehicles, while important, particularly early on in the war in places like North Africa, play a major role. Are they Canada's greatest contribution? Not even close. I mean, I lump that in together with production, which I still put pretty low, even though, and this is a mind-boggling stat that people don't really know, and Tim Cook talks about it, and I think it's his 2-volume set, or it's one of his books, is that Canada outproduces all of the Axis combined. Canada's not making tanks. Yes, I know they're not making all the weapons. The Axis has to make it all themselves. I get that. But in the pure numbers, Canada outproduces all of them combined. Not just Canada. We're what, 4th in the list? 5th? 4th? Because you have, US, UK, Soviet Union, Canada's top 4, top 5. And that's another thing with why Germans thought they could win when they took on the British Empire. Who one of the countries can outproduce you on its own. I mean, numbers and everything, blah, 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 whatever. But to me, it's mind-boggling that it goes that way. Anyway, so that's an important one to me as well. So this is a really interesting question. So how annoying... So from Hidden History here on YouTube, how annoying / why do you think it is that Canada's contributions to the war efforts are basically always glossed over? Surface level, yeah, they are glossed over in a lot of ways. Okay, well, I'll go for the first part of the question, actually, because I'm thinking about this. I used to be annoyed by it all the time. And then, as social media does, people are like, oh, it doesn't matter, it doesn't make a difference, or you guys aren't ignored, blah, 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 and all kinds of crazy arguments get made. It's just not worth the time or energy to get involved in it anymore. So annoyed? No, I don't get annoyed anymore. This is just me personally. People can get annoyed, and that's fine by me. I mean, better you be annoyed, because then you can be the driver on that, and I can do what I do. So I don't really get annoyed anymore. But why do I think they're glossed over? A lot of the times they are glossed over. Particularly in popular media, right? You have Longest Day, I think, is the example that comes to mind for everybody in the big ones, right? That's supposed to be D-Day, and there's no Canadians in it at all. Juno Beach is shown for 5 seconds from the perspective of the Luftwaffe, which is interesting in all kinds of ways, and people justify that for various reasons, and I don't agree with them, but it is what it is. That comes to mind for everybody. There's never been a major production because... And this is another reason why Canada's contributions get glossed over. It's just there's not that many Canadians, right? We're dwarfed in population by the United States and the UK, separately and combined, right? You want to do an American-British production, you've got a built-in audience of 400 plus million people of just those two countries. So we tend to, and yeah, Norma is also this, we get lumped in with Britain a lot. Again, I've seen this recently in some videos. Don't want to name names. I get why. We get lumped in a lot of the time. It's an expedient thing, which I don't really like as an excuse, because if you want to do things properly, you should separate them out when the people at the time separated them out, which happened in both world wars. We get lumped in with Britain. That's another thing, because it's just expedient and easy. But there's just not that many of us. And I don't want this to because I get accused of this all the time. It's not a woe is me thing. Talking about what I tried to do, because it was just less of us, and Canadians, and especially, and we have I would say, a dwindling interest in all things military in this country, generally speaking. And that comes to military history. And why do I try to appeal to a broader audience? A, because you guys are awesome anyway, and I want to know as many people as I can who are interested in this, because I love having this community. But what I originally, right, everything was OTD, or on this day in Canadian military history, right? I changed it. I'm not on Twitter well, the account is still on Twitter. I don't use Twitter anymore. But why I changed it is because I literally had people saying, I don't care about Canada. I go, okay. So, a lot of things on social media and online are surface level, quick recognition, quick glance, and that's all it takes, right? It's things like that. So it's part of it. It's just, we're not a big country. It's hard to get people interested in this stuff. So it's hard, right? As a Canadian, it's difficult. It's difficult to get just Canadians interested in this. So that's why I tried to build an international base. I mean, it kind of happened organically anyway, which is fantastic. It's part of it, but there's just not that many people interested in it. And this is why I struggle so much with what I'm trying to do, and why I think, again, I'm just busy with other things, and I get that there's obviously the personal issue on this of why the channel isn't where I want it to be. Still want it to be a bit bigger. I was hoping for 10,000 subscribers by the end of the year. That's not going to happen. Sorry, I can just keep reading these things. I'll come back to them in a second. But, the channel isn't where I'd like it to be, and I think the Canadian focus has something to do with that. Probably a small part, but I think it's part of it. But we don't get glossed over. We just get kind of pushed to the side a lot of the ways. We get lumped in with the Brits. Like, I see Juno Beach called British all the time. Videos talking about how Falaise was a British battle, or, San Lambert was a British battle. And I go, there's no Brits anywhere near there unless they were part of the South Saskatchewan, part of the South Albertas and all that stuff. Unless someone was born in Britain, then there's no British units anywhere near there. That's fourth Div territory through and through. Or Ortona was called a British battle, or an 8th Army battle. And I go, nah, cool, guys. That's not true. And Rob makes a good point here. And I think this is just generally speaking, is you promote your own. Yeah, I mean, the U.S. looks over overlooks the British contribution. The Brits overlook the Americans. Sometimes the Brits overlook the contributions of the Empire, of the Commonwealth. And we do it too, right? We overlook the British elements of the First Canadian Army. We don't, Vimy, again, and not to harp on it, but we forget that the Brits actually were part of the Battle of Vimy Ridge, right? There's British units through and through involved in that. British Army units are there from the beginning. A lot of the artillery is British Army. This isn't Brits born, in Britain serving Canadian units. These are BEF units. These are British Army units, infantry and artillery fighting. So we tend to just forget that. We even do it for the lesser ones, like Canal de Nord has a British division under command of Currie. Nobody talks about that. We want to keep it Canada, Canada, Canada. And then, of course, we lump off, pull it back up here, the Soviets, right? The whole Cold War plays into that. Today's events are going to do the same thing. It was changing a little bit. We were tending to look at, the Soviet contribution a little more up until 2014. And even as of February of last year, for obvious reasons, we tend to just push them off and not understand what's going on here. So just going to come back here. So yeah, so this is, I think, and I can explain why this is the case. Yeah, me too. I think it's kind of funny because it still annoys people that other people got annoyed. They still do, which I think is kind of funny. This is all because of Mac Aiken, who becomes Lord Beaverbrook. He's a Canadian-born press baron. He owns, I don't know how many newspapers at the time. He literally has the political influence in Britain and Canada to say, hey, we need to promote what Canada's doing in the war. And he did it. And he had the political capital to do so. So that's why, right? He literally sets up an office for this to happen, the War Records Office. And they're the ones who do all the photos and the books. And I mean, I've got Canada and Flanders behind me, reproduction. The films, like there's so much film of Canada in the war, and a lot of it's recreations, but there's a lot of Canada in there, right? And that's why, because Max Aiken is Canadian born, Canadian raised, and then goes to Britain. And he's a press guy, gets the point of PR and what that means. We don't really have that same push in the second, even though he's still around, but he's in the government of Britain at the time and things like aircraft production and focusing on other things. So it doesn't really happen to the second. So this is interesting because I agree in some respects. The Canadian efforts aren't completely ignored by the movie industry. I mean, people bring up The Longest Day. Canada's obviously involved in Normandy from the beginning, even before the beginning, RCAF, RCN. But Juno is a major beach. Doesn't even get a point of coverage at all in the movie. And there's British units there. You think they want to even get them involved, right, with the 48th Commando, the British and other units that come in later, and like provosts and all those different support troops. So it doesn't even get a mention from that. The second, not really, because I'm struggling to think of of films that feature a lot of Canadians in the Second World War, especially. First, we have Passchendaele, which is just it's awful. It's terrible. So bad. You have things like The Forgotten Battle, which was fairly new on Netflix there, about the Shelled, which has its own problems. Yes, the Canadians are involved and are shown in the strangest way possible. Couldn't have picked a worse way to do it, but that's what they went with. They made it about the Canadians through a Brit, which is just so weird, connected to Market Garden as a pilot, a glider pilot, just bonkers. Anyway, so, I mean, we don't get glossed over, but we sure do get shunted off to the side a lot. And it's all because of the same things I face here. Issues of cash, interest, support, all that kind of stuff is just part and parcel of all this. So that's it for the 4 questions. So hopefully that answers people's questions who had submitted ahead of time. Hopefully that hits what people wanted. So I'm just going to work through questions already asked. And if you have other questions or you were waiting for, the live stream to ask your questions, now is the time. Oh, sorry, just working my way. Yeah, I talked about Britain Alone from Rob. Can talk about that more if people want. Talked about Chris and the permanent force troops. Oh, so this was asked in connection to Scott's question about RCN officers and things to do with the U.S. Navy. No, we are not still in possession of nukes. Why would we be? I don't know. We don't need them. Another political football. So why do it when the entire U.S. arsenal can cover Canada 10 times over? There's no point. There's no point in having it when the biggest military and biggest economy in the world is on your doorstep and does it for you. What's the point? You know what I mean? So this is an interesting one. So have you ever thought about covering Canadian Commonwealth radio and comms logs code words? I've been going through some and haven't figured some out. Horse, pony, child, baby. Yeah, there's some wild stuff in there. Some people have been doing work on this. Some people do it out of just interest and learn it. I have, because I see this myself, right? You see it in the comms logs and the radio logs and things like this. I've never done anything with it directly or anything in this capacity, just because it didn't come up too much. Because my dissertation was on Hong Kong, right? And this is important. This is going somewhere. The problem. It's not just talking about my dissertation again. So that's early in the war, right? So things change, but also because all of that stuff is destroyed, right? Because the garrison falls and they're made PW, so they destroy those files. So it just never came up for me. I didn't have to worry about comms logs because they don't exist. There are some, but they're so basic because there's such little communication at the time because of the battle, obviously, between Hong Kong and Britain. There's nothing about hiding that. There's nothing about disguising, calling what a tank or mortars or any of that stuff. Like there's none of that. It's like colony has fallen. Okay, you don't need to code that because the Japanese know that. You know what I mean? So it never came up for me in that capacity. It's come up when I've started to do some Normandy stuff. So I have thought about it and doing the digging and pulling up those books and the things like that. But the ones that come up a lot for me are so down to the the battalion level for objectives. That comes up a lot for me in some work I'm doing, particularly in Italy. It comes up a lot. Like a hill or a town will be codenamed and things like that. So it's really down to that level that I've kind of more come across this. But yeah, it's not something that I've come across. I don't know if anyone else has done it on YouTube, and if they have, if it's reliable or not, because you see people do stuff on here and it's just not good. Just because they cover it doesn't mean it's done well. So yeah, so I haven't done anything with that. I don't know how, again, this is just the realities of YouTube. I have to be selective in what I do because if no one watches it, it takes up time and effort, and I can only do so much, as this is not a full-time job for me. I wish it was, but it's not, because then I could do what people at this level want done, but I can't. So that's the issue, right? I could dig and dig and dig and dig, make, take months or the weeks or the research necessary to do something of that nature, and it just goes nowhere. And that just doesn't work, unfortunately. It's just the nature of the game. But it's something I find personally fascinating. I wish I knew more. That's what I mean. I come across it myself more and more. And there's some things I don't know off the top of my head, and I'm going to dig within the file or go back to the comms or try to dig online. So I know there is some stuff out there. So it's, again, how reliable it is, I don't know. And I know things change, right? Because comms change all the time because they have to. So this is interesting. Again, talking about like those sit-down strikes and things of discipline. I didn't know about that, about the South Albertas, but I'm sure it's covered in the War Diary. I mean, it's got to. That stuff's all available now. Oh, this is funny. Not a question, but Norma talking about her subject that she spends a great amount of time on, and I mean great in a good way, because I learned a ton from Norma's work on Burt Kennedy. It was court-martialed for misuse of petrol. I think that's just due to the rationing. Unless it was official business. Sorry, it was too far. That's probably why. Because I come across that I was doing something for the RCAF Foundation group I work with about number 6 group, and it came up a lot about rationing of fuel because they're in England, right? That's their base. So some of them had cars, and they had the car, but they couldn't go places half the time because of rationing. Sorry, I'm just going through here. If you guys have questions, fire away. I'll get there in a second. Oh, this is a good one for Marks and Sparks. Good question. And I want to do more getting back into the myth stuff. So this is maybe a good way. So based on your previous shows and on World War II TV, and indeed any new research, what longstanding World War II myths remain to be busted? Oh, there's a lot. The big one for me currently, especially with my current focus on Normandy, is about Juno Beach. People literally say this to me all the time on the videos I've done previously on Juno Beach, is that it was a cakewalk. That's literally a quote from someone, or it doesn't matter, Omaha was worse. And I go, okay, why is it a competition? That's, I think, a myth in and of itself. It's not a competition of awfulness. That doesn't make any sense because they're bad in different ways, right? You can't compare Omaha to Juno or Sword to Juno. They're different, and they have different things going on, different objectives. So it doesn't really work that way, but that Juno was a cakewalk. I don't know where that comes from, to be honest. Maybe people looking at it nowadays, right? If you go there nowadays, it looks easy to land. Of course it does. It's not a war. So why people think that, I honestly have no idea. Yeah, it's wide open now, but it doesn't mean it's wide open on June 6, 1944, because it wasn't. Right? It was heavily defended, and it was an urban environment for a good chunk of it. So that's difficult to do any day. And driving around there now is not easy. So imagine trying to do that. People are trying to kill you. So that's one that really bugs me is comparing the beaches, and then, which is worse? And I go, okay, well, that's not how this works. Because, Juno Beach is 1 division, Omaha is 2 and a bit, and different levels and different ways of doctrines and different ways of objectives and different geography. It just doesn't really make sense. These aren't apples to apples here. It's like literally apples to oranges. It's similar, but not really. So That's a big one that that drives me a little crazy. Sorry, I was about to say a World War I one, but you asked for World War II. The Dieppe one is big, and again, this is a general one for me. Is that the Canadians were just cannon fodder again in the second, which wasn't true for the first, nor was it for the second. You see it with Hong Kong, you see it with Dieppe, and it's worked its way into Normandy a little bit because of Monty and the anti-Monty crowd, which some of it is true. That's the thing, right? There's always a little bit of truth in here. It's hard. That's why it's hard to bust these things, right? It's said that, Canada is cannon fodder, but he doesn't care as much about the Canadians as he does the Brits. Overall, that's just not true, because I don't think Bonnie really cared a lot about most Brits either. A lot of class stuff in there. And that's not just me. That's not me saying that. I'm getting that from other people, other historians. He was very much a snob. Canada is given a lot of tough assignments. Shelled is one of them. And that is, there is support for that. It's tough, and it's not given the proper support that it should have been to do it properly. And then you have the pro-Monty Brigade coming out and say XYZ and blah, 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 which some of it can be debunked based on records and strategy and tactics and all that kind of stuff. At a broad level, at a base level, there is something to that. Really tough assignments. The Shelled is definitely one of them. Parts of the Netherlands are very difficult as well, which doesn't come up a lot either. And now that I've been there twice now, and I've seen this ground and the difficulties that are given to parts of, even 30 Corps, which is under 1st Canadian Army in parts of Germany and in the Netherlands, right, with Operation Veritable and Blockbuster. That's some tough fighting, and it's very difficult. And it's given to the 1st Canadian Army, but Brits are fighting there too. So it's not just that, it's Canada's cannon fodder. But yeah, they are given some tough assignments, and that's one of them. I'm trying to think of other ones, like Bomber Command is a big one for me, especially lately, because I've been doing a lot of work on Bomber Command and the Canadian role and Number 6 Group and the two sides, right, that it was pointless and, it just killed civilians, and then others that they were, doing important work and all that good stuff. That's a big one to me, because there was also a huge controversy here in Canada about Bomber Command and the Canadian War Museum and the Valor and the Horror, all that stuff. There was a lot of that going on there too, and there's a lot of misunderstanding with that. I'm trying to think if there's some other myths out there that really bug me. No, that's all really off the top of my head. There's nothing really groundbreaking major. A lot to do with Hong Kong as well, but I think I've done a lot on that. Just need to get that into a book, which I don't know if that's ever going to happen. But I've done the work. It's in an academic form, so not a lot of people look at it. Yeah, that's a good story. Coming back about the films and stuff. Yeah, that one's RCN. Captain of the Clouds and James Cagney, RCAF with the BCATP. Canadians are literally taken out of the Great Escape, even though Canadians are involved in the real thing and executed as part of the thing. Billy Zane as a Windsor Guarder. I have never heard of that. Okay. Bye, Norma. Thanks for hanging out. I've never seen this last draft. Okay. People seem to be heading out. So any other questions, I'm happy to answer them. I don't think I missed anything. So anything else? Anybody coming in? Questions? Whether you think it's absurd or not, don't. Oh, hey, Rob, History Explorer. Since you asked. Talking about a bit off the hop. So the Canada and Normandy project. So it's kind of something I've been batting around a long time. It's going to happen. This is probably not what you're asking about specifically. It's going to happen for sure. What the format will be, and especially because we're almost 2 hours into this, I can talk about this now because it's a little buried, but people who are really interested can hear this. What it will look like will depend. I haven't booked anything to go. My plan is to go in April of next year to do all the filming, because I don't want to go there for June because it'll be too late and the interest will wane, as these things tend to happen, right? If I go in June, I won't get everything out until much later and people won't care anymore. If I have everything ready to go for June, it'll be better. However, I can get there That's not the issue. It's everything else. I'm having a bit of trouble. And again, this isn't a woe is me. I'm just got asked, and I'm going to talk about it. I'm just having a bit of trouble with the support element of this, with things like Patreon and things like that. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. I'm not going to get upset about it. Well, I want to go, and I have a family connection to Normandy through my heritage, but also with a relative who was killed on Juno Beach. And I've been there, but I want to get back because it feels personal to me. It's personally connected. But if I don't go, I'm not going to have a fit and whatever. Some people claim I do. It's just I'm having trouble getting up the support that I need this to be at to get the project where I want to be. I could do everything from my office and with the archives here in Ottawa. I can do the project that way. I think it will suffer if I don't go. And as of right now, I'm not sure if I can go. I can get there because I have points. Like I have aeroplan points for you Canadians out there. I have the miles for you Americans to get there. Everything else is going to be difficult to pay for. Again, I know I'm preaching to the choir, especially this late end, but I just want to get to that out there now. So what it will look like is depending upon how much support I get in the next little while. The numbers of the channel are getting better, but they're still not great. Videos are not even hitting 1,000 views anymore, which is not good. I need to get the numbers up. So if you can help in that way, that would be great. If people can watch and share and watch again, that would be awesome. That would be really, really helpful. Anyway, so the plan and this is the part that I get excited for. So if I talk too fast, I'm sorry, because I get excited and that's what I do, is I want to cover Canada and Normandy like it's never been done before. There are documentaries on Canadian elements of Normandy and looking at Juno Beach and other parts like Total Eyes and things with Michael Whitman and blah, 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 blah. What I want to do is get every major engagement covered with footage of the ground, talking about the context, taking that footage of the ground and the commemorations even of that now, and working my way to adding to that, to the historical footage and photos and talking about this stuff in the depth that it deserves to be talked about. You can find stuff on Juno Beach and trying to clear Corsol or Bernay-sur-Mer. But if you want to do something like Puteaux or watch a documentary on Puteaux, not going to happen. It doesn't exist. If you want to do, Cardenville Farm, which I don't know if Scott is here to see that. I don't know if he's watching. Not Scott. Not you, Scott Grimwood. I know you're here. Scott Dearly. Dearly. Sorry. Ugh, have to learn how to talk after a while. I see you come there. I'll get to that in a second. Eunyoung in a second. Sorry. So yeah, I want to cover things like Cardenville Farm, or Gordon Henry takes out 5 panthers in a matter of minutes. If you want to watch a documentary on that, you can't. It doesn't exist. If you want to watch that as part of a series, you can't watch that. It does not exist. It's in the books behind me multiple times, but no one's turned it into a film or a way that's accessible on YouTube. It doesn't exist. Like Canadians fighting in fillets, can't find it. I know, Rob, you did The Gap, and which was fantastic. If you haven't seen on the History Explorer, his episode on the Fillets Gap is fantastic. And I'm not coming at you, Rob. Sorry, that's not what I meant. But you know what I mean? You know what I mean. You do this stuff too. Just you can't cover everything all the time, especially if that's not your focus because you do what you do well. You can only do so much. That's why I wanted to focus on this and start now. I've already started. Right, I've already started on the RCN video because I'm going to do RCN and RCAF. And once those are done, that's going to get released when it gets released because those will be the first ones up because that's all pre and into the landings to begin with. So it fits chronologically and also fits my schedule. So that's the thinking, right, is start that way and work my way forward. So I want to hit the little ones that people might not know a ton about, looking at things like tractable but also doing things. And I think, Rob, you said you were maybe doing this where you got footage, things like Worthington Force, right? We talked with Mike Bechtold on the channel about that. But get the ground and cover the ground as best as possible and get the memorials but also talk about that in the way I do things, right? The way I do things on the channel where I have primary documents, right? Are the base of what I do. Yeah, so it's a lot of work. It's going to be a ton of work, and I've already started. I'm going to have to spend all my time talking about this. Sorry, all my time working on this. There's going to be no other videos for the next, no non-Normandy videos for the next who knows how long. I got one more coming. I put a post on this, the community post. If you haven't seen it, you can check it out. I have one more I'm still working on, is the 1st Special Service Force, also known as the Devil's Brigade, Black Devils, and Anzio. I found some great stuff. My patrons and YouTube channel members know about this. They did traces of the maps of what they were doing and holding the line. And I'm going to look at a day that is really, I think, historically important in a weird way. And you'll see when the video gets released. But that's going to be the last non-Normandy things as we move into 2024. So that's what I'm trying to do, is do a deep dive, get this stuff in depth, and do it the way I want to do it and the way I think it should be done. Yeah, well, Scott, where to go? Sorry. Great tank battles on the History Channel. I'm laughing at the History Channel. I'm not laughing at you, Scott, because you're right. They cover it, but they cover it in that sensationalized, we're obsessed with SS Panzer divisions type way. And that's not what I'm going to do. I'm taking the Canadian front and center, right? It's not going to be about what SS division is, whatever, and, being the fanboys. Like, that's not what this is going to be. So that's the thinking. So I want to do that. I want to do from the landings, cover the beaches in depth, and then as they literally move their way forward. So I'm talking about this in a bunch. Woody's talked about it. How the Canadian stuff is almost in a straight line, and it is in a way, because it kind of follows the road. It follows the Con-Falaise Highway after Con is taken. So it literally lends itself to a narrative overall in that way, and easier to drive, because driving around Normandy is not easy, because all the crazy roads. So yeah, it's how I want to do. I want to move through the major operations, like talk about like Carpiquet. I've already done some stuff on Carpiquet, but I've seen hardly anything else on Carpiquet. Like, there's been great academic work done on Carpiquet and how it happens and why it happens, and Dave Patterson, who's done stuff on it. It's fantastic. But it's not done in this format. Yeah, there's documentaries here and there about armor engagements, but it's usually not coming at it from a Canadian perspective, or it's coming at a place of, we want to make a documentary about the SS. They just have to be fighting the Canadians at this point. That's not where it's coming from. So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm going to cover, those ones of us who know. Yeah, no, I know, Scott. I'm not saying that sorry, I didn't express that well, because it's also going on 2 hours here. It's not just about the fanboys, but anyone who does that kind of work is banking on them watching it, right? It's not even fanboys or people even realize that they might be inadvertently supporting the SS, but they are interested in it. But that's all they read, or that's all they watch. It needs runes and swastikas on the cover, or they're not going to touch it. You know what I mean? If that makes sense. I'm not saying that that's what they're doing, but people do that, right? They do. I've done videos on the SS for that exact reason. I just subvert that expectation and say, this is why the SS are shitty. And people get upset. And I use evidence and people don't like the evidence I use. They think it doesn't count, or they're just fanboys, whatever. Doesn't matter. Anyway, I know what you're saying, and I agree with you, but that's part of it. It's hard. People do this on YouTube too. Getting your cars. I hope not. Oh God. I'm a North American, man. We have big roads here. You got nothing but space. I am a little nervous. I'm gonna go like 3 kilometers an hour. Everyone's gonna hate me, but so be it. That's why I'm going at a quieter time too, so I can take my time. Oh geez. Oh geez, Canadian action I've heard about near NC Saint-Contest, just north of Con. Unit held out in a bar. I think. Are you talking about Cardenville Farm? Is that the one you're talking about? Because I'm not sure which one this refers to. I don't know any. Sorry, Rob. Very illustrative. Yeah, for people who want to, because people ask me about going to Normandy, right? I'm like, the roads are bad. Not that badly maintained, it's just like windy old cart trails, right? It's crazy. It's hard to describe, especially to North Americans. We don't have that here. Everything's a straight line from kilometers forever, particularly in Canada and major parts of the US. Anyway, that one I'm not sure which one. If you can pull something up or give me more details, because I'm trying to remember farmyard near Saint-Contest. Because I know of a few. I don't know like the details off the top of my head, but a few closer to the beach, in like the and like the day or two after the landings. But I don't know anything about this thing called tests. Sorry. But that's the things I want to cover. Things like that, you know what I mean? Like Biron, tea, things like that. They held it in an orchard. Sorry, Rob. It's really I am having trouble picturing that off the top of my head. I'm just trying to do the map in my head. I don't have anything else open. I'm just looking at myself like you guys. Yeah, well, I got everything mapped out, and I'm going to cover everything as best I can. So hopefully I get the one you're talking about. If you can give me more details later or now or whatever, that would be great. Because I believe you. I'm having trouble. I can't picture it off the top of my head. Sorry. Yeah, I think you might be talking about Cartonville Farm, because I've talked about how that should be a movie. Because there's an orchard in behind the farm, because this is a multi-element battle, because it's trying to hold them off from getting into Brettville, part of the brigade battles, as it's called, right after the landings, and it's they hold what is called a farm. It's more like a factory, an area just outside of. It's part of Brettville now, which has changed its name again, because the urban sprawl has connected all these places together. There's an orchard in behind, because the Panzers come and attack from the east, not from the south. So they come in behind and they basically take out the anti-tank guns that are in behind the farm area, which is thick Norman walls, which is still there today, but it's used as a, I think it's like a yard, like a yard for a contractor, maybe. I can't remember. Anyway, it's still there. There's a memorial there. It's still on a public road. There's been some development there even recently that's changed it. But yeah, there used to be an orchard. The tanks went in. The Panthers went in and killed a bunch of Canadians and took out those positions. But those within the walls held off the attack. The tanks take off when daylight comes up, and then the SS send in their infantry and some engineers in broad daylight. The position's about to be overrun, and then they get walloped by artillery. Canadian artillery just blows the hell out of them, and they just blast away because they're just advancing in broad daylight. And another reason why I don't think the 12th SS was that good, because their offensive actions were just downright dumb. They didn't think an enemy would hold on to a position when they were attacked. Okay. Anyway, don't want to go on and on about that. But those are the details I want to do, and I want to do them in standalone. But you got to do things like get footage and get on the ground, or have a primary document or an account that really grips people. But you need all of those things. Like JD at History Underground does. He does it. I don't know how he does this so much, but he is like the master of this stuff. He does it all the time, with going to the Second World War, First World. He's doing stuff on Verdun right now, looking at Civil War battlefields, because I did that one video on the Civil War, Canadian Medal of Honor recipients. So I was watching some of those, and the way he's able to blend story and get footage of the ground and make this into a thing that's engaging is fantastic. And I've told him this before, because I was on his channel a while back. Anyway, he does a great job, and that's kind of what I want to do, not in his way, but in my own way, of blending my academic background with the YouTube. Sorry, I hit some wires, stuff like that. So that's the big plan for the Normandy project. Working on that right now. I was looking at it yesterday, working on trying to finalize the events I want to cover, because I can't do everything. That's why I say major. What major means is it gives me some leeway. But things like Cartonville Farm and the battle at Brettville, that night battle, that's just this run and gun craziness that I had Shawn Claxton on, who's in Normandy, just like Woody, on a while back, talking about his book on it, which is great, by the way. That kind of stuff. So I'm going to cover that, and then the big stuff too, like Totalize, which has been covered to death because of Whitman. But then after the fact, right? Like, what does that advance look like? What does Tractable look like? Because that Tractable doesn't get discussed as much, because that's what Totalize doesn't do the full thing of what they want. So they have to stop and regroup and launch Tractable, and then the push literally onto Falaise. The city itself, which is got an old castle. It's got a William the Conqueror castle. It's where he's buried. Or no, he's buried in Caen. No, he's buried in Caen. Yeah, his castle's in Falaise. He's buried in Caen. Anyway, and then literally onto where the gap is further south, right after the Argentine. And then I want to also cover some things that are connected, like the poles, right, at the Mace. and they're fighting to keep the counterattack off the outside of the gap off, because that's connected and they're under Canadian command, so that counts. And it's part of the story. So I want to cover that as well. So that's my plan. It'll be me on the ground going early, getting set up as much as possible now and into the new year, and how much I can do. But again, I need some help. So if you can in any way, if you can just watch videos, send them to people. I need my view counts to go up, because that helps a lot with the channel being able to turn the money into the project itself, because I just need the ad revenue and I need more exposure, to be honest. So that's the thinking. So I want to get into the archive, get those documents, get those reports, because there's a whole whack of them. All of them, from the armored units, from the 2nd Brigade, Armored Brigade, the infantry. Some of this stuff hasn't been digitized, so I have to go and do it. There's some stuff at the War Museum I want to look at to augment all of this, because I want it to be narrative driven, but narrative from primary sources. I hope that answers your question there, Rob, from the History Explorer. And again, if you haven't watched the Juno Beach episode that he just put out, you should. It's fantastic, and it's got the wheels turning in my head with looking at the strong points. I've been thinking about that one a lot lately, that are still on the beach there. It is memorials and with the plaques on them and things like that, like WN 27. Been thinking about that one a lot, just because there's that photo of the North Shore attacking in from the rear, and to help take out that artillery position, like, and how I want to talk about that story and the things I've known, because I've been there, but I want to do it differently and kind of blend how I do things with all of that, because I think it's a great video, and thanks for putting that out. I really appreciate it. So if you have any other questions or something sticking out to you now. Sorry, I missed Young's question here. Maybe you want to, this is something I was going to talk about too. You want to open member only videos to wider public, increase the number of views. So about the member only videos, usually they're not member only videos, if that makes sense. Just 1 second here. They're usually just early access. So you get them sometimes a week in advance, a couple of days, depending on my schedule and how I want to release them. Or things I can't release widely on YouTube. Like it was very brief, but I looked at some stuff for Peleliu, which is specific, the Pacific, and all that in the advance of the Philippines. And this is uncensored footage from the Battle of Peleliu. That won't fly on YouTube, right? Because of age restrictions and all that fun stuff. But the members, I'm not worried about member only videos getting views in that sense. This is to share a resource, to tell about this part of it, and the nastiness that is war. You can do these sanitized documentaries like I'm going to have to do for Normandy, but I can't do those widely. It won't work, because they'll just age restricted and no one will see it, right? As soon as you get any sort of restriction, it just gets put in the back. This is why YouTubers talk so much about monetization. Yes, it's about making money. Yes, it's about getting ad revenue. But also, if it's demonetized, that means it also goes to the back of the queue of the algorithm and nobody sees it, because it's been restricted for some reason. They've taken the monetization off because it goes against the guidelines. So that causes an issue, so no one will see it. So that's what I do with those. And that's why I shared that. I shared that for Peleliu, because that stuff is just, the battle is absolutely brutal. And it's hard to convey it with just the written word, because I took a passage from E.B. Sledge's book, right, about Peleliu and what he saw, and it lined up almost, way with this footage I found. I can't describe it on here because this will get demonetized, but it doesn't really matter. It's a live stream. Anyway, so I don't really have members only. Like, some channels do that. And again, not knocking them. It's just what they do. They have whole series that they just do for members. But they're massive, right? They have a team. They've been at this for almost long. Some of them have been at this for over a decade, and they have resources and whole staffs and researchers and graphic artists and editors, and I'm everything. Right? This is why the Normandy project is massive. If it was a team, it wouldn't be too bad, and it could be done really, really well. But it's just me. Just little old me doing this by myself, always by myself. So that's why there's nothing member specific. Would I do that? Yeah, if I could. honestly, I would at this point. I've kind of changed my opinion on these things and how I want to tell stories. I don't want to restrict it, but based on how platforms operate, telling some of these stories properly, they won't reach an audience anyway. I could throw them up. They can get age restricted. People can watch them as long as they put in a birth date that says over 18 and okayed sensitive content. Those people could watch it, but the system's not going to push it. So if I had more supporters, like to give these videos to, I would. If I had the ability to make more of them, I would, but I can't. I can only give things like early releases because that's all I can do as an individual. So it's just me, and that's why it's usually early access, because that's all I can offer. I try to offer as much as I can in terms of benefits to members, because I don't want it just to be a donation for nothing and for pity. I want to give value. I want to give some value with my background. That's why I share documents. I share clips unedited. I share how I'm working. Like I've shared some stuff about the first Special Service Force video and how I plan on showing it and what I'm working on and how that video is going to look. But other than that, there's not much else I can do because it's just me and I have other work that I have to do. Yeah, not a pity party, just trying to explain, as I always try to be as open as possible, as I've always been with OTD. So other than that, I don't have any new questions. Unless someone's got a burning one and wants to get it in now, I'll give you a few minutes because I'm on a bit of a delay and then the numbers are going up. So I think people might be turning in now. 3 p.m. Eastern time, 2 hours in. If people have questions now, fire away. I will continue. But other than that, I think I've covered anything pressing, burning, anything else anybody wants to know about the channel or me or whatever. I am more than willing to talk about it. Other than that, I'm doing some reading lately. Got hopefully live stream coming up on a book about Canada and Civil War from another perspective from another historian who looked in some connections to that. So I've been reading about that and English's book on failure of command or something like that. I forget the official title, but his book, Canadians in Normandy and Failure of Command or something like that. Failure of leadership, something like that. Yeah, Henry is the tank commander whose tank takes out 5 or 4 Panthers in the matter of minutes because they ambushed them outside Cartonville. Yeah, it's on the other side of the field and stuff. I mean, there's not showing that ground doesn't really. It's developed and I think it's privately owned, but there's not much to show. It's literally just flat farmland with a railway embankment on the other side. They just catch them off guard and blow them to hell, showing what the Firefly could do, and that the Panthers were not invincible. And they could get jumped and they could get taken out very easily, actually. And that's exactly what happened. And the story's not very well known. And it's a hometown unit for me, right? The 1st is ours is the unit that Henry's in, and that's London, Ontario. Their museum is there. That's what the Holy Roller tank is that I talk about all the time. The one that's behind me, that's cast of a model of it from the treads that they took off when they refurbed it. They took the originals and turned them into that as a fundraiser. And I have one now on my shelf, and I'm surprised it hasn't collapsed it because it's super heavy. But that's from that unit, from 1st is ours. So, no other questions. Again, I don't want to just sign off when somebody's got something because it happened before. But the numbers went up. So if there's anybody else out there typing furiously away, I will continue. If not, I can sign off and see where I can do with the rest of my afternoon. Probably more work on a Saturday. That's what I do. Other than that, thanks everyone again for the super chats and all of the support. I appreciate it. And all of the support you guys have given to OTD and what I'm trying to do. Really, really means the world to me. I say this all the time, and I don't want to sound repetitive, but it's just the truth. You guys mean the world to me to have an audience that's interested in the same things I am. Talked about this before, didn't have that growing up. Didn't have that even through university. So having this it means so much to me to have a community that is as passionate about this stuff as I am, because I didn't have that. It took learning digital history. Yeah. So it's great. Oh yeah, I think it was something I did miss. Scott says, yeah, that's when I want to go. I'm planning on going in April, early April, if I can make it. Yeah, trying to figure everything out. Because it's going to cost a lot of money because I need a car, right? Because I need to be able to travel on my own. There's public transit, but it's not goes to the places I need to go. A lot of farming. Like the Western Front, you know. Yeah, anyway, so it doesn't look like there's any more questions, but yeah, so other than that, thanks everyone for coming and hanging out on a Saturday. Hopefully, if you're watching this later as well, do we have people signing on now? This happens every time I say goodbye, people come on every time. Yeah, so for those who submitted questions beforehand, hopefully that is good enough answers. I know some of them were the best answers. There's not much some of it I can do. Especially with things that are classified. Not much I can do in terms of those. Okay. Oh, people come on. Yeah, hire a bike. I thought about doing that myself, but I just don't think it's going to work with all the gear I need and the conditions, right? I need to go some distance. I need to go, if I'm covering all of it, I got lots of ways to go. Yeah, and people, I just want to say this real quick. You don't feel when it's shy, always ask questions. I love questions. I won't shut up. So I need something to talk about. Are you talking about military history? Because I have lots in mind. Yeah. A high school library should have. I think there's like the general books are good to have for a high school library. I mean, some of them are not the best. Like you have the Max Hastings books, John Keegan's books, because they're good at sparking interest. Like I would recommend those, like the overarching ones that aren't too dense. Like they're great for, older people like me, that are good to have to understand, but they're like so academically inclined. That kind of thing. Sorry, 1 second. Great question. I'm coming back. That is not going to happen. Level endurance. Yeah, because I can do that with all that time I have. Yeah, it'd probably kill me, the amount of distances I'd have to travel. Yeah, so I would recommend like those overall ones are good to have. I'm just trying to think because I got so many nowadays. Those are really good. I like those because I like them at that age as well. I mean, there's again, I talked about this at the beginning, but Tim Cook's books are good for that age level as well. Because they are in depth, but they're not inaccessible because that's how Tim does it. And that's not easy to do, as I was talking about before. Writing that way is not easy. Most academics can't do it. That's why they don't do it, because they can't. Tim can. And it's learned. He had to learn to do that. And that's why I respect him so much. Just trying to think what else. Yeah, anything general is good to have. There's a whole bunch of like illustrated ones are good to have as well. Those I would suggest for high school, because again, that's a way to get engaged. That's what got me hooked in a lot of ways. I think I was always hooked. Again, people have asked me about why I have this interest. And it's hard to answer because I don't know. It sounds bad, but it's true. I've always had this interest, and I don't really sure where it came from, to be completely honest. I don't know. Just always wanted to learn about this stuff. I always had like different interests as a kid, and then this is the one that stuck forever. Like that happens for people, right? They have interests as kids, they move on and never come back to it, or they're like, oh yeah, I used to love blah blah blah. Like this is trying to make a career out of this. This is my interest since I was 11, 10? I don't even know when it started. Anyway, so things like illustrative works, I know they get a bad rap on like say public history, academic history, people for grown-ups basically, but for kids in high school age especially. They can handle them. They can handle the difficulties of the difficult subject matter of the Holocaust and the crimes against humanity and the loss of life and things like strategic bombing when civilians are killed in mass numbers and what happens in China and all of that. They can handle it, and it's a good way of talking about it. It's a good way to do it. I mean, yeah, the Osprey books, sorry, I'm only hesitating. I'm not disparaging the Osprey books. I just don't think they're the best for high school because some of them, not all of them, but they're so in depth that they assume so much knowledge. And that's problematic, I'd say, for a high school level. I mean, but for anybody else, yeah, you can do that. But for high school level, when you're 13, 14 years old and you're trying to spark people's, interest in things like that, you gotta do some lifting for them, if that makes sense. You gotta present it in an engaging way and gotta give them something that's going to get their attention. It's not necessarily going to work for a public history audience like the Osprey books, which they do. Academics use them too. I'm not saying that they don't, but you guys know what I mean, right? I'm not disparaging anybody. But you guys know what I mean. Like they're too narrowly focused. They assume some knowledge. Whereas some of these more broader books, like I don't even know, like I got these books when I was younger. They're by the same company, same publisher, same people almost working together of the First and Second World War that are broad in a good way, that are illustrated. Like that was a game changer for me. And I had one on Vietnam. I don't think there was one on Korea, but they did a whole bunch of them. I don't really use them anymore, obviously, because it's just so it's so broad focused. I mean, but if I have a child, they'll be like, here, read this. You know what I mean? But yeah, that's broadly speaking is. Yeah, I'll have to find it. I'll have to pull it out afterwards because it's literally at the bottom of my pile of the bookshelf to the side, and it'll all collapse on me and it'll kill me. I'll have to find it, but I can tell you later, Chris. I can't remember, but they're connected. They're in the same series. Anyway, so yeah, no, I mean, yeah, I do that too, right? But I gotta stop doing that. Is assuming everyone's like us because they're not, right? You gotta get them interested. This was a question earlier. Yeah, Death by Books. Almost been there when I put up the new bookshelf. Oh my god, that was like that was a test. Almost lost my mind. Anyway, yeah, you know what I mean. Like we gotta think about the next generation too. We were talking about that earlier with about interest in Second World War in Canada and commemoration for the upcoming anniversaries and that kind of thing. I think it's connected, right? I always think about this too, right? Is working as a public historian in the capacities that I do, even outside OTD, it's different, right? We got to expand our thinking a little bit. I'm right there with you. I am right there with you, man. Completely agree. You think everyone's like us, and how can you not be interested in this? This is the great thing. This is a great topic, great community of people. Like, what's not to love, right? But that's not the experience of a 13-year-old. You know what I mean? So, or a 17-year-old who's going to university or isn't going to university and still wants to learn, how do you do that? You know what I mean? I think about these questions a lot and what I'm trying to do and trying to engage people in different ways. And this is why I'm still trying a lot of stuff to see what'll stick and what'll work. So yeah, I mean, it was people with, hyper focused. I mean, again, lots of problems with having neurodivergence in this society of ours, but one of the good things is that hyper focus. And I don't have it myself, but I get it. I get the hyper focus and all of that. I can certainly have an empathetic view of that. It's just you assume these things, right? Again, not saying bad by you any means or any of us here, because that's just who we are. But if we want more people like us, we got to get them in. So sorry I didn't have anything specific to say because I'm just running in my head. Going back to the question here from Kay Thompson is, what should a high school library have? The broader, the better, in my opinion. Again, most of what I know is Canadian, so I'm not sure if you're talking about like a Canadian or American or wherever. You said high school, so I'm assuming North America. Anyway, there's like a whole bunch of books. There's some good ones, some bad ones. At that level, I argue it doesn't really matter. How do I say this? It's going to sound bad. Because this is another thing that they, the people who do YouTube education say. Chris, thanks for coming out. We'll wrap up shortly here if we don't have any more questions. But there's a point I want to make is sometimes they say the best way, or this is a rule of the internet, right? The best way to get the right answer is to post the wrong answer. YouTube is also a way of, sometimes they tell you, make mistakes because people will comment on it, then more people will watch the video. In this sense, yes, getting history wrong is bad. Not disagreeing. Not bad. But, say if someone makes a generalization in a book on Normandy, because I have a few of those though, right, that are general about Normandy, and it's like D-Day Day by Day, which is kind of a weird title, but it's just a Normandy Day by Day, but D-Day gets sales. It's those kinds of things, right? If they do a generalization or they get a detail wrong or the general's name wrong, yeah, it sucks, but that might spark that person to dig more and be like, hey, that's wrong. Or, oh, I looked this guy up and that's not his name. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? But yeah, like there's a ton of Canadian. It's hard to do this on the fly. Canadian if possible. Tim Cook, if you want Canadian, Tim Cook's books. Shock Troops. First World War is at the sharp end, and Shock Troops. World War II is Fight to the Finish and The Necessary War. Yeah, those are the 4 I would recommend because they're narrative driven. The dog's not here. This is why I can keep going. The dog is on a doggy play date somewhere else, so no dog to worry about. This is why I can go for 2 hours and not have to worry about anything. Wife took the dog, I'm good to go. Yeah, those are the 4 big time. Start with those. Mark Zilke's books are good too. I've got a few of them behind me, as you can see, but they're just drilled down more, right? Like Holding Juno, D-Day, or Tona, etc. Those would be good too, but if, like, say a student's like, I saw this thing, I watched a YouTube video on World War II and I want to know more about Canada World War II, because like I used to do that to our high school librarian. He was a great guy, great librarian, really knowledgeable. I was reading a book and I'm like, oh, I actually enjoyed reading this book in class. Do you have any other suggestions? So I think about things in that sense, right? Like how to spark interest, how to get people going. So that's what I'm thinking of. Tim Cook's is a good way to do it because he gets the details, but doesn't get bogged down in the minute details, but still gives you a gateway, and is so accessible in the best way possible. I mean, I asked him about this multiple times. I'm like, I asked him one time, just point blank, I'm like, how do you do this? And he's like, it took a lot of work. I wasn't like this at the beginning, and he still does it book after book after book. It's just, sorry, I keep singing his praises, but he deserved it. Yeah, I mean, yeah, the Stratton book is good too. I mean, he was supposed to do a series that never finished, but he's done a general one as well. I have the first volume. There's never been another volume. But yeah, it's 400 level class. Like, that's not the level I'm talking about, right? Like, the level between a first year 100 level or whatever of university versus a 400 level class, even though those are like miles apart, right? It's not even the same ballpark in a lot of ways. Like, it's so different, these different levels, and I get it. Keeping them all straight is so hard, right? Trying to do this at different levels. Like, that's those organizations, and I work with one of them, who are focusing on education aspects of this and hitting like children in like high school in Canada and elementary schools. Like that, how they do it is just, they got teams and everything, but my God, it's so hard to do these things and to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and be like, well, I've been studying this thing for decades. How do I get someone who has no idea about this to understand it, but still make it engaging, but still make it factually accurate and good history? It's so difficult. And a lot of us, I don't mean historian, I mean just people in general. It's so hard to do. And hats off to organizations that do that. Okay, anyway, I don't think there's anything new. But yeah, I can, if you want to reach out to me, Kate Thompson, I can help you later on if you want further details, if you want some more details. I'm going to be putting together an annotated bibliography for something else anyway. So I can help there if you like, if you want some more detailed about those and some more ideas I have. Again, it's just hard to do this on the fly. I've got so many questions. Anyway, thanks everyone for hanging out this Saturday afternoon, evening, whenever you're watching. Thanks again. I appreciate it. If you can support the channel any way you can, please do. So yeah, there's lots of ways to get a hold of me. If you go on the desktop version of YouTube, the channel page, there's an email there. You have to click it to stop bots. Click on it, get it to me through that email. That's the best way to do it if you want to reach out to me generally or for this book list. Please do it that way. It's just easier for me to keep organized because I get so many messages all over the place. It's just the best way. So anyway, thanks again, everyone, for hanging out. And I'll let you know what's going on with the channel when that first special service brigade video on Anzio will be coming. Probably not for a bit yet. But other than that, thanks everyone for hanging out and all your great questions. I'll see everybody next time.